Hi, everybody. My name is Hannah. I'm the local marketing producer at General Assembly Denver. We're really excited about this event tonight, kicking it off for Earth Day. So tonight you're joining in on the future of renewable energy. So I've got a group of lovely panelists here tonight speaking on their parts in renewable energy. And for those of you who don't know what GEA does or what GEA is, General Assembly is a global education company. We specialize in helping people find the work that they love through education. So we've got full-time courses in software engineering, data science, UX design, then we have some part-time courses in product management, data analytics, digital marketing, Python. I think we also do visual design as a part-time. And then we also have some one-off classes. So if you guys are just looking to upskill on the weekends or in the evenings, you should check us out for that too. Then we also do these really awesome events like we're hosting tonight with these lovely panelists where we have some industry experts speak on their great topics. Also shout out tonight to Anne. She's from the Best for Colorado. And that is a program of the Alliance Center. So they specialize in helping companies get more sustainable. Anne, do you want to kind of speak to that just shortly before we kind of kick things off?
Well, thanks. So the Alliance Center is a nonprofit Denver-based dedicated to sustainability. And Best for Colorado is one of the major programs to help companies, local companies, to just improve their practices. And so happy to partner to host this meaningful, interesting conversation such as this one. Thanks, Anna.
Yeah, and so Anne's going to be helping me in the chat today. So before we kick off the panel, just a couple things to note. You guys cannot see yourselves as attendees. That is by design. So if you do have questions or anything, feel free to ping Anne and she'll add it to our question queue for the end. How tonight is going to run is that we're going to start the panel. It's going to be about 45-ish minutes, and then we'll open up for Q&A at the end to let you guys kind of speak your truth. And I'll also be asking you some questions in the chat as well. So feel free to answer in there when I ask kind of questions into the crowd. So to kick it off, I'd love to start with a round of introductions. So Jason, maybe you can kick us off.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Jason Traeger. I'm the founder and CEO and head of data science, also head of sales at Sustainablist. And we are a consultancy that helps companies in solar and energy efficiency use data to improve operations and outcomes. So we come in, we help our clients with data analysis, machine learning, putting that machine learning into operation, and generally just turning data into money, but only if you're doing good things for the world. I have a PhD from Berkeley, mechanical engineering, and I'm a data nerd.
We love data nerds at GA. Mike, you want to go next?
Certainly. My name is Mike Krueger. I'm the president and CEO of the Colorado Solar and Storage Association. We're the trade association that represents the 500 companies and over 7,000 employees that install solar and storage throughout our great, glorious state. Primarily what I do is policy and legislative work, but I have the honor and privilege of working closely with so many of our members from all through the solar chain, from kind of business development all the way up through every now and again I get to go to ribbon cutting, which is a lot of fun for once a project gets energized. So happy to be here. One of the key things that has to happen to our electrical grid is a digitization. Without that, it's really hard to get the decarbonization goals we're going to. So really excited to work with GA tonight and going forward about how do we get more of the folks that are getting through these classes into the electric power sector.
Thanks, Mike. Tanya, you want to go?
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everybody. Thanks for spending your Earth Day evening with us here on this panel. I am a co-founder of Photonimbus Consulting, which is a very small consulting firm based out of Santa Fe, New Mexico, but operating nationally. The work that I do is really to respond to what I would categorize as a persistent and urgent need for the renewable energy sector to be very good at adapting and improve the way that they do business, to handle the myriad of obstacles that always seem to be confronting the industry, that the industry always manages to flow around, and the urgency of scaling this up so it meets more of our energy demands so we can live in the future of tomorrow that we would like to. So I operate as a consultant that goes into EPC companies, so solar companies, mostly on the photovoltaic side, and work with the teams there to transform their business processes, primarily on the operations, project delivery side of the business. And it's very inspiring work. It takes me, until recently, physically all over the nation, and now I transport myself through the electrons, continuing this work as it's never been more urgent. And I got into the industry. I've had a number of different careers that all began when I was 20 and got interested in renewables and took the very scenic path through various educational opportunities, master's in optical science and engineering, and did all of that schooling so that I could then start as an installer. And I worked my way through the field of managing crews, nitty gritty, daily, everyday reality of what it means to put this stuff on the ground. And so that's my background and much longer story than I'll convey here.
Tanya might want to define EPC.
Engineering, procurement, construction. So those are what you'd think of as your classic, if you wanted a solar project on your house, or you were a business and wanted to have a system on your business, it's who you would call to do that, the companies that provide that service. Thank you, Jason.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Tanya. I appreciate it. Clark, you want to go next?
I think you're muted.
Thanks for telling me. I mute on purpose because there's a lot of background noise. Thank you. My name is Clark Bell. I'm the Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of AquaYield. AquaYield's reducing agricultural inputs with our patented process of infusing nanoparticles with a lot of the widely used fertilizers and chemicals that are being used to grow the crops that we need to have to feed our mouths. Give you an example of one of our products that we just released. It's called Nano N Plus. Nano N Plus will reduce the amount of nitrogen that a farmer needs to put on his crop, upwards between 30 and 60%, depending on the crop and the soil type and things of that nature. Why is that important to energy? Nitrogen just takes just so much labor and so much resources, and it also has just quite a large carbon footprint when you have to produce nitrogen, and it's about 35 to 40% of the amount of fertilizer that a farmer uses. And so we're tackling quite a global pandemic with algal runoffs, with excess fertilizer being used with our scrappy startup based out of Utah. I'm excited to speak with you all tonight, and happy Earth Day.
Thanks, Clark. Matt, you want to bring us home?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Elmore. I'm Managing Director here in Denver at Pivot Energy. We are a EPC, as described earlier, and developer of commercial and community solar projects all over the country. Our headquarters is in Denver, but we have offices in Chicago, St. Louis, and New York and DC. So we're spread all over the country and have just about 50 employees. We focus on, we're a bit unique in that we focus on an equal mix of on-site, behind-the-meter solar energy systems for business, really any non-residential entity out there. So it could be a university, it could be a corporation, you name it. But we also do a healthy mix of community solar development. We're the largest community solar developer in Colorado, but we also do that work in Illinois and a number of northeastern states as well. My role, I've been in the industry for 11 to 12 years now. Started in Oregon, but I've worked in the Midwest and Colorado and the Northeast. And my role at Pivot is partly kind of office shenanigans, whatever that entails, but also a large, probably 80, 90% of my work is handling our biggest commercial customers and community solar subscriptions around the country. And yeah, just really thrilled to be here. Looking forward to the conversation. And one thing I wanted to ask you, Hannah, will our information be shared with people if they want to reach out to us? Is that something that is possible?
Yeah, for those who feel comfortable too, if people want to be able to throw like their emails in the chat and things like that, if anybody wants to connect with them, that's definitely something that we can do. Also, people should have been able to see you on the event page, but happy to, for those panelists that are comfortable, I can include you guys in our follow-up as well.
Cool, great.
Yeah. So thank you guys again for being here, and audience members, now you got to know them a little bit better. I'm thinking we get to know you a little bit better. So if you guys could go ahead and in the chat, just pop in what industry you're currently in now, whether that be like tech or sustainable business. If you guys are in energy, feel free to just toss that into the chat. Got some solar folks, nonprofit, design, very cool. Advertising, ed tech, citizen activism, lovely. Energy innovation. Very cool. Thanks, guys. So it looks like we got people kind of coming from all over the place. So I'm excited to kind of dive into this, and then hopefully at the Q&A lern a little bit more about what you guys are kind of hoping to get out of this. And feel free to kind of toss that in there as well as we move along, if there's anything in particular that you're hoping to really gain from this. But as we move kind of into our panelist sector of the evening, Tanya, I'd like to kind of start with you. Can you tell us a little bit of how you made the move into renewable energy and what clean energy means to you?
Yeah, I spoke a little bit about it in my intro, and it's interesting because I feel like renewable energy in some way, shape, or form has really motivated everything I've done since almost out of high school, even though it took me almost 15 years to actually work in the industry. So I took a kind of a circuitous route. And so, you know, it almost feels like I was never into anything else as much as it just took me a minute to get over here. And the skills that I acquired on the way, on the other, you know, academic and other pursuits that I had really developed capabilities that I'm using now, which is great. And the motivation to finally get into renewables was I was working at the University of British Columbia as a research associate up there, which was fantastic. Being in Vancouver, the work was really interesting, but it was really desk oriented, and I really wanted to be outside, which is why I ended up finally deciding I could converge my wish to actually work outside with my hands with the renewable interests that I was pursuing really the whole time. And so that's why I guess I would say I got into it, which was to actually finally do the thing that was on my mind for a long time. And I think, you know, what renewable energy, you know, when this question was posed and I was really thinking about it, of why it makes sense and why it matters. And it's so much of what we do, like humans are really creative we're novelty generators. We're using a lot of resources and energy around us to do that. The purpose of which, we could have a whole panel on, the nature of humans and why we do what we do. But that creativity is really compelling and engaging to us, and it's one of, I think, the hallmarks of our species. And to be able to engage in civilization while utilizing energy that is far beyond what a mere mortal could maybe generate and concentrate, and do that in a way that you can wake up and do that every day, day after day after day, while leaving your ecosystem intact. Like there's kind of an accounting, like there's a balance in an accounting, like we can have this creativity, civilization, consuming energy and concentrating beyond what you could do as an individual for these things that are kind of amazing, and still be in balance with our ecosystem, because we are not separate from it. We are part of it. We are part of the earth, and we're part of the earth's experiment. And so keeping that connectivity and that ability to wake up every day doing it, knowing that you're not deficit spending, basically. So you don't have the moral complications and the anxiety associated with deficit, basically, which is what we're creating, I think, with renewables in so many ways. And so I think that's what renewable energy means to me, is it really frees, I think it would free us to engage in those pursuits with a much cleaner conscience and with a lot more creativity and connection to the earth that actually, in the end, sustains us.
I love that. Thank you so much. Would anybody else kind of like to piggyback off of that? Because I think that was a really cool answer.
Mm-hmm.
I'll just say that I love that answer as well, especially coming from someone who it sounds like who's in the weeds, working with contractors who are, yep. A lot of my experience, myself included, there's a lot of pessimism in the everyday of the solar industry, just like the volatility and the uncertainty. And so it's great to hear that you've got a kind of a high philosophy for it as well, in addition to working, day to day and tackling the practical challenges.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry too much about volatility in the solar industry writ large. It's still such a young industry that's so far from optimized that there's going to be a significant room for growth there.
Yes, but it's not a straight trajectory there, Jason. We call it the solar coaster out of love, but it is a solar coaster.
Yeah, I get it. And a lot of that is self-imposed.
Hey now.
It's the truth. The solar companies don't like to use data to optimize their operations.
We're starting this conversation. I love it. Mike, kind of like spitballing off of that, like how have you kind of seen the solar industry change over time? Like from like kind of building upon that.
Sure. So I will concede to Jason that the solar industry certainly has not traditionally optimized data or the data what they've done. I mean, I've been involved in energy just for about the last 4 years now. But going back, of course, solar energy was the custody of environmental, tree huggers, folks who may or may not, wear sandals all the time. And we're installing solar at a time that it didn't make any economic sense. There just was really expensive way to procure energy. And so why would you do it unless you had some ulterior motive, something, a higher standard like Tanya does. But for most folks, they looked at it and said, wait, my electricity bill is going to go up, not down. I'll wait. And what we've seen due to dramatic changes in the technology, improvements in business practices, generally just scale, we're now seeing where solar is primarily middle of the afternoon is the cheapest way to procure energy on the grid. And so what's happened is, and I see this within my membership, is folks who have been fighting the good fight for 20 years and have lots of scars and were ridiculed and laughed at. And now everyone's like, of course, solar. Why wouldn't you do solar? Solar's so cheap and it's so great, right? They're on one side that sort of has to deal with that. Then there's another side. I have folks who come out to Denver in Brooks Brothers suits from Manhattan because there's a lot of money to be made in it now, like a ridiculous amount of money to be made. And so folks will come out from Manhattan with their Wall Street money, looking to buy projects, looking to get involved. So, you know, we're talking about gigawatts and gigawatts of solar being added to the grid, and nationally, even here in Colorado, probably 10 gigawatts over the next 10 years. If you're not in energy and you don't know what a gigawatt is, it translates into billions of dollars. So to me, the real change has been this sort of environmental ethos, save the world. I'm going to do this because it's the right thing to do, to now where there's folks who are saying, right or wrong, I don't really care. There's a lot of money to be made, and I'm interested in being part of that conversation. And for solar, some of our growing pains right now are how do we integrate those two spectrums? How do you save the world? You know, it's Earth Day, so how do we save the world? But also, how do you make a lot of money? Because whether we like it or not, we live in a pretty capitalist society, and people make economically efficient choices, and they're going to choose, you know, a product that's cheaper, easier, more convenient, better in some way than another. And so, if we can marry those two, and that's really going to be the challenge, I think, for the United States and for the world over the next 20 years to avoid the worst impacts of climate change, is we have to marry those two. These folks who have a bunch of money can't make fun of the hippies. The hippies can't be revulsed by the money, but instead have to see a way in which they can bridge that and make that happen.
I love that. And that's really great insight. Thank you so much. And so Jason, maybe to kind of speak to like that higher level where you're saying like solar is a really young industry. Like speaking from my perspective, I'd love to learn a little bit more about like what's some like frustrating misunderstandings or what people might get wrong about like sustainability or clean energy.
Well, so in a lot of ways, just to build on that, clean energy is I think the number one misunderstanding is that clean energy is expensive, right? It's like the most inexpensive power deal on the face of the planet that has been like signed over the past few years was in solar. I think it was in Saudi Arabia. Solar added more jobs than nuclear, natural gas, and coal combined for the past 2 years, and continues to employ more people than those people. And I think that the problem is that, like, people call it, you know, yeah, it's clean energy, but people think clean is more expensive. So I think that's the biggest problem right now. And I think that the other thing is that people think that it's inefficient for some reason, is that you have to give something up, when in fact you're actually giving something up by not doing it. You're giving something up by not optimizing your processes. You're giving something up by not reducing your waste, right? We have 100 years of manufacturing science, right? We have whole industries that are built on waste reduction, like automotive, right? And it's like the reason there are cars everywhere isn't because people were like, oh, I think I need a car. It's because the industry standardized and got their shit together and like built really standard components, right? And that's where we're going as a young industry. We're not there. We're not even close in solar. Like we're starting to do things, right? We're standardizing permitting, and so, and I'll get to more on this later. One of the key misconception is that it's more expensive, but the problem is that we don't live in a capitalist society. We live in a society that has markets that are arbitrary and that are in the way of solar.
Right. I think that's a really good point.
I'm just going to poke.
Go ahead.
I don't disagree with you, and Matt, as an active developer, probably has a lot more to say on that. I would say one of the other things that my very conservative father-in-law reminds me on a regular basis is that the sun goes down, and that somehow solar is like, you know, suddenly you have to end the world. The president will sometimes talk about the wind will stop blowing and you can't use your TV. Guess what? We've all thought of that. We're all very aware of that, and we have solutions. And so there's nothing drives me. I think my father-in-law doesn't drive me crazy, but certainly to hear
Tell
that.
him to go to sleep. Be like, sun goes down, go to sleep. Don't worry about it.
I wish that were that easy, but yeah.
No, and I think you make a really good point of kind of like the society we're living in today, Jason, and how like there's kind of these things that are in the way. So Clark, maybe you could kind of talk about like, what do you think the role is, as like a business owner is in like solving these social problems to like kind of show that maybe it is like creating some monetary gain or helping these industries that need it?
Yeah, so this is something I'm pretty passionate about. Whereas, when I look at my father, my grandfather, who are both, entrepreneurs, capitalism was really around to, of course, make a profit. That's why we start a business, is so that we can have gross profits and net profits, so that the risk that you put into whatever you're working on has a great reward. I think the view of capitalism has really changed. When Mike discussed the environmental ethos and how we're seeing just gobs of interest from Wall Street to Silicon Valley and everything in between, there's a huge interest to make something very profitable that's also benefiting the earth. And so I think the new role of capitalism now isn't just to earn a profit, but it's also to solve a problem that's actually meaningful. We're not talking about fidget spinners. We're not talking about, phone covers. We're talking about things that are actually going to benefit society, so that our great grandchildren will be able to go into the same parks and forests and rivers that we were enjoying when we were their same age. So that's my viewpoint when I think about capitalism, that you really have to be thinking about, the triple bottom line.
Thanks, Clark. That's awesome. And so kind of thinking about like these innovations and how we're kind of building upon like creating these like clean energy industries and trying to make them really efficient. Matt, maybe you can kind of talk about how like technology has changed this or played like a pivotal role in like trying to make these more pertinent.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just say before I dive into that, on the topic of the free market in our capitalist society, love to have a few comments on this one. I think a lot of us in the renewable energy industry, whether it's wind, solar, I mean, really anyone in large scale energy markets, likes to talk about how many subsidies the oil and gas industry gets, and that's very real. They come in a variety of forms. It's incredibly complex. Every state's different. It differs by nation, but those are real. Those comes in the form of hundreds of billions of dollars a year, and that artificially suppresses the cost of oil and gas. And so that affects our industry in that we're trying to sell, and while we also have subsidies of some sorts, it's not nearly as vast as oil and gas industry, which has been around for, I guess, almost 150 years. So I think that for those people who think that we operate in a free market, it's pretty much a huge joke. I mean, some areas are more than others, if you want to put it that way, but it's not a level playing field, and it's not going to be for a long time, even if national leadership changes and all those things. So I think that's important to point out. Does anyone else have any thoughts before I dive into kind of technology stuff on that? I'm just curious if.
Yeah, so I don't come from the solar industry. I come from the farming industry, but the average commodity farmer, so somebody that grows cotton, corn, soybeans, they're typically subsidized by the government to the tune of 40 to 65%, depending on the year or what have you. And then you introduce coronavirus, where we literally have farmers dumping food, hundreds, if not millions of tons of food, because we can't get into a restaurant. And that's why we have things like $440 billion in addition to the $2 trillion, loans from the CARES Act. So yeah, it's very heavily subsidized in my industry and sector. And that's why we have, all these things occurring.
So does that mean you're a socialist?
Myself?
Well, you're engaged in a heavily socialist industry.
I would say I'm certainly a capitalist, but I certainly subscribe to some of the benefits of socialism. And I would just like to say, like what Jason said here, because he's trying to, get some mind stirring, is I think people have to be more comfortable with realizing, this idea that we're entrepreneurs and we're capitalists, but in reality, a lot of that methodology and those ideals have been dead for 20 to 30 years.
I think capitalism and socialism are both pretty much meaningless words. I think that if you don't actually write down the set of rules you're trying to describe, then you're not actually describing the system. You could ask 10 different people and get 10 different answers for each of those words. So.
Yeah, well, writing down the rules is part of what the trade association does. I spend most of my day fighting over literal rules, electricity rules here in the state of Colorado, and exactly how much voltage can feed back onto the system, exactly how big of a
You're doing the good work.
So I agree. I think we are, generally we are focusing on trying to allow people to optimize their returns for their risk, as someone mentioned earlier, but it's not free. The energy market, if you're going to get into the renewable space, you need to be fully aware that it is heavily regulated and that it is heavily influenced by policy. We have seen, one of the best policies ever for solar was the investment tax credit, the ability for folks to take up to 30% as it used to be, now it's 26, off their taxes. It brought a huge amount of money to support a large deployment, but it's going away. And so the industry is having to adapt and having to figure out what the future looks like with that single policy change. We will survive, and I think we'll thrive, but it is not without its challenges when you have a one or two key policy changes. Deep breath, Jason, deep breath.
I'm going to actually circle back too, because Matt, I think that you kind of talked to the role of business, but would love to kind of get that answer about technology and clean energy.
I think it's actually a good segue from what Mike just said, because one of the most common questions I get from, let's just say, a business owner who wants to install a couple hundred kilowatt system, a couple hundred panels or more, is, well, if I install them now, is it going to be, am I going to save more money in 5 years, or are the panels going to be outdated? Is the efficiency going to be so much better that I'm going to regret my decision? And of course, I'm trying to sell solar, so the answer is no. But the answer is no, because the panels, the technology for solar, and this is true for a lot of other wind, I think to some degree as well, is that the efficiency of solar panels in the last 10 years has increased. Panels are better quality. The equipment overall is better, but it is not like we're producing 3 times more per energy per panel than we were 10 years ago, right? It's just not the case. So there are incremental gains across the board, but those are part of the reason why solar has reduced in cost. When I started in solar, I was selling systems, the exact same size systems, for 5 to 6 times what I'm selling today. And the equipment today is better. So we have dropped dramatically in cost, and that's a comparison of like 10 to 12 years ago or so. So there's been major progress on that, but that's not necessarily a result of technology per se. I mean, the solar panels we use today are essentially the same technology that was created by Bell Labs in the 50s, whenever that was. But it is more efficient, but it's economies of scale, and it's the reduced cost that really make this compelling to people. Just like others on the panel had said, this is a price question, right? Most of my customers are not environmentalists. Most of them are either corporations with sustainability goals, so a form of environmentalism, if you want to call it, but they're also just people who like the return on investment. And so I want to emphasize that the economies of scale came about partly as a result of technology, but also, I think, even more greatly as a result of policy. Policy was, and both on the federal, state, local level, from permitting on up to the tax credit Mike mentioned, those are the big impacts that really allowed the industry to scale up. And I don't like to place a huge emphasis on technology per se, because people always come to us and say, well, are we going to have a panel that produces 10 times more energy in 5 years? And all these like kind of silver bullet solutions that are just unlikely to happen, at least in solar, right? Like, these incremental changes are important, but I do think there are other technologies that I'm definitely not as familiar with, maybe some other people can talk about, that have an opportunity to break through in a much bigger way. Energy storage technology, there's all sorts of other innovations going on out there that could make a much bigger impact solely because of the technology But I like to bring it back to policy and activism. I think that really has over the last decade been the key to the growth in the industry. But I'm curious if others disagree or have other thoughts.
I would be remiss if I didn't take that as a teed up from Matt. So I do solar and storage. So energy storage primarily is focused on lithium-ion batteries, the same battery you have in your iPhone, however bigger and kind of badder. But there is a lot of technology work being done on the R&D side on batteries. One of the so not only improving the iPhone, your lithium-ion battery and make that better, but other types of batteries and energy storage. One of the things that plagues the electric power sector writ large is that spring and summer, we have lots of excess electricity from renewable sources, or we have the potential to, depending on where you live. But we are not able then to shift that, hold that energy for any significant amount of time and shift it to the summer and or the winter when we need it most. So there's a lot of interesting technology breakthroughs that are working their way through the system on energy storage for sure. So if you're looking to be at the cutting edge, solar is great, storage is better.
Jason, I'd be kind of interested to hear a little bit too about how you think like data plays into clean energy. Because I think like along the lines, like people are asking a little bit about like being like an engineer, having that type of background, but what does it kind of look like coming from like a more data background when it comes to clean energy?
Yeah, I think that in a lot of ways, so kind of just to like address the spectrum, right? In a lot of ways, like successfully putting clean energy onto the grid is a very data intensive exercise because you can't do it as guesswork. You can't, eventually you have to say, okay, I'm going to put this battery there and those solar panels there, and I'm going to control this load or this building remotely in XYZ manner. And as the machine becomes more complex, which we are making it more complex, then we have to be controlling it very finely, or else we will lose power quality. We don't have many blackouts in this country, and that's because we have a very finely tuned grid. So the actual optimization of resources is critical, but also we can use data to help sell this. That's one of the things we do. We use machine learning to sell people energy efficiency, as an example. And so we can do that on the other side, because people are asking about like on the other side of what can you do with clean energy. It tells you where the problems are, right? And so I think one of the most important pieces of data you can look up is what is your state's renewable portfolio standard? And if you're not an engineer, you can still call your representative, and that's the most important thing you can do. And if you don't like your representative's opinion, primary them. So that's how data can play in.
Love it. Thank you.
I want to give hope to all the liberal arts majors out there. I have a history degree. I taught middle school for 9 years. There are plenty of opportunities within solar if you don't have a kind of a hard science background. Until coronavirus was happening, solar in Colorado was adding 1 new job a day every day. It had been for over a year and a half. And certainly some of those jobs were engineering jobs. Some of those are the construction jobs, like the folks that Tanya works with. But there's plenty of marketing jobs. There's plenty of accounting jobs, plenty of back office kind of company jobs that are available. So don't give up by any means. We need everybody.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that. I'm a philosophy major, nothing beyond bachelor's. And there's, I think in our company of 50, we have maybe 4 people with engineering degrees of some sort who actually design the systems. Beyond that, it's all people with all sorts of different degrees all over the place. We're kind of unique in that we don't have installers in-house. We have project managers, But the good and the bad thing with the solar industry specifically is that you can't really, there are certifications for installers and some engineering aspects, but everything else, there's like, you can't really go to school for it. There's some grad programs, but you just need to get experience with a company and go from there. I think that's slowly changing as the industry matures and becomes more robust in the US, but there's not like a great path. If someone tells me I want to sell commercial solar, I'm like, well, you need to find a company, and that's it. Like, don't waste your time on grad school. Don't waste your time on all sorts of stuff. Just go find a company to work for, and that ends up being your grad school.
Nice. Thank you so much, Matt. And I think we have time for about like one more question because I'm seeing a lot of questions and stuff come in through the chat. So we've got a very curious audience. But I'd love to hear, especially with everything kind of going on in the world, what's kind of giving you guys hope right now during the time of COVID in your respective industries or just kind of in general? Clark, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, happy to. So in addition to the sustainable fertilizer technology that I'm involved in at AquaYield, I also have ownership in a landscape products and farm company. And right now, our sales year over year have increased by 120% because people have realized the value of taking care of their yards and doing gardening and connecting to the earth. So just seeing that in the short period of time has just been really excellent. So I think that's one thing that we're going to see after this pandemic is people are going to be more interested in being connected to nature. I can't tell you how many social media posts I've seen from people where they talk about, with their kids. I've got young kids, 10, 8, 5, and 2, and a lot of the people I'm connected to on social media are kind of a similar space. How they're all just talking about, man, I used to run my kids to piano and to soccer and then to swim lessons. And it's been so nice to not have to turn on my car, add a carbon footprint, go to the hustle and bustle. This pandemic has really got me grounded. So I think that's the first thing. The second thing for me that I think is going to be really interesting is, we've talked about earlier how I talked about, hey, it's all about, typically you're a capitalist and you start a business because you wanted to have profits and you could build some kind of wealth, what have you. I think a lot of businesses have been solely based off of just having revenue growth in an upward trajectory. And I think a lot of this also kind of when you look at a lot of the public companies in the solar space, it's all been about revenue. And there hasn't been as much focus about cash flow, profit, and taking care of the people that work at your company. I think those three things are going to be, I think that's really going to flip the way that we look at startups and companies when we don't just think about their actual sales, but actually, what benefit do they add to the economy and to communities. Then second to that, are they actually profitable, and if they have cash flow versus just getting gobs of venture capital money that they're just burning every 3 quarters, and then they raise another $50 million. I think that's going to be huge for all clean tech sectors, that they're going to be valued differently. And they're going to manage their businesses differently based off of what's occurred in the pandemic.
Thanks, Clark. And I know, Tanya, you and I had kind of talked about this a little bit on our initial call, but would love for you to kind of chime in on this as well, too.
Sure. Yeah. This is a very interesting time. There's some mornings I wake up and I feel like the world's ending and we'll never figure it out. And other times I wake up and think this is the best thing that ever happened to us. So I've got feelings and perspectives along the entire spectrum here. I would say when I'm feeling hopeful and when I look out there and see in other people and also myself, one of the first things that I observed that I think is a positive, which speaks to the comments about being grounded, is that there was an immediate evaluation of what is really a fundamental concern in an individual's life. Thinking about, and people, like, it is, the toilet paper situation is very comical, but I think it was an expression of that, like, what's important and what really needs to be happening, and how am I actually meeting my basic needs, and what are those basic needs. And the sense of community that came out of really looking around, and our worlds in some levels got really small really quick. At least that's how I felt like mine did. And you view the capabilities of your immediate surroundings very differently. Who do you know? What are the industries in your area? Could they make face masks? Where's your food coming from? Is the water still going to be on? Like, asking these really basic questions that kind of ground us. I think in our world and through the internet, we disperse ourselves, we project ourselves all over the world, and we're almost atomized in a way. And this experience, to me, it was very localizing, and I think that'll be really helpful for people to appreciate and remember to be present where they are in their communities in a way that I think we could benefit from. And the other thing is, well, there's two other points I would have. One is that the entire world, as somebody who is a change and adaptation professional, is having to do things differently than they ever thought was possible. The entire world is doing this. And I think that can be unsettling, but it's also showing people that they don't have to do things the way that they are done. In fact, you can do them differently, and in fact, you must do them differently. So I'm wondering, as we sort of unpack and unfold and discover our new normals, whether people are going to be a little bit more open to doing things and perceiving things and funding things and valuing things in a way that's different than we have in the past. And the last thing with renewables, one thing that I'm really excited about and has put additional fire under my butt about the work I'm doing and the people I'm doing it with, is that I think renewables can be a really strong part of our economic recovery going through. It's a strong industry, there's a strong interest, it serves our basic needs, it employs a lot of people. And if we change some of the political and financial landscape to unleash the industry a little bit more, we could really put a lot of people back to work.
Yep.
In all aspects of this industry, which is really exciting to me. And renewable, I tell you, I worked in a contracting company for a decade, and there was always the darkest cloud on the horizon. It looked like we were going to die at least every 6 months for some reason or another, and we did nothing but thrive. The renewable energy and regenerative agriculture and all of these things that we need to do have the kind of this envelope of inevitability that just allows us to flow. The creativity and the passion and the problem solving of kind of an urgent mission driven activity just allows for innovation that isn't necessarily present in other industries. So I think those last 2 points together, the ability to surmount obstacles and thrive in an embattled environment, and how much we could do to help bring our economies back together and put people back to work, are really inspiring to me.
And Tanya, not just that, we are going to be having stimulus programs that retrain people into new industries. Yeah. And we might as well do it for an industry that's the future.
Yes, I would share that perspective.
Yeah, agree.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Thank you so much. I think that was a really, really great perspective. And I think I'm looking through, so we're kind of popping into Q&A, and I see people throwing some things into the chat and into the Q&A as well. And one question I think that really kind of pivots off that is like, what do you see as like some good resources for finding those job opening in sustainable tech, or what kind of steps do you recommend for people maybe trying to kind of pivot into it?
There's climate jobs. That's could we put together a list and send it? Like, is there somewhere we could post that? I feel like I've seen a whole bunch of these over the past few days, but also start your own thing, right? Especially if you're just sitting on your couch right now. start a side hustle that's sustainable.
All right. And then I guess,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
I'll add just real quick. I mean, I think I get this question a lot. I'm pretty active at Colorado College where I graduated, and I get seniors all the time, or even people earlier in their college life reach out to me and say, "Hey, where do I go?" And it's actually it's a big fault of our industry that we don't have. Not that we could have a single centralized database, but it's very dispersed. If you don't know someone in the industry in a particular area of not just solar but any industry that's sustainable, it can be really difficult to get in. I do think though that trade industry associations like the one Mike runs here in Colorado, not all of them have job boards, but the one that COSA runs is pretty active. I've always seen jobs updated there. It's all sorts of jobs. It's installer jobs, it's manager jobs, and it's all sorts of stuff. And that is probably in Colorado where I send people first, in addition to the member list of COSA. But every sort of industry has a trade association. The wind energy association has state and national level ones that have really robust job boards. So that's a great place to start. Other than just like networking and reaching out to people directly, the renewable energy industry is incredibly friendly, I would say, overall. And no one's gonna tell you to just go away if you're really pumped about getting into the industry. I've never come across that. I think if people reached out to anyone on this panel, they'd be excited to talk with you about their roles. So that's unique. I don't think that exists. No offense to any accountants or other, but it's just a different vibe. And I think that is where, you can reach out to basically anyone. Doesn't mean they'll have time, but they probably will chat with you and help you out.
Thanks for that plug, Matt. I would say that I was doing 1, maybe 2 coffees a week over the last, say, 3-4 months. I try to take every request for tell me how to get in the industry, and I think Matt's exactly right. We are looking to that. So yes, job boards are great, but you're better off stalking people on LinkedIn. I would recommend that first, and because we're still small, and so we still very much work on, hey, I had this conversation with this woman. Hey, I met this guy. You should give him a chance. That's really, most folks I know have been able to jump from oil and gas here in Colorado, which is the kind of the newest migration is folks out of oil and gas into solar have done it almost exclusively because they had somebody who else had previously made the jump and was willing to introduce them. So do not be afraid. If someone is in the renewable sector, reach out blindly on LinkedIn. I'll bet you a solar panel, they'll respond to you.
And we'll only shame you a little bit if you come from oil and gas, just for like a minute.
Well, I think we should be compassionate for those people.
I agree.
And charge them extra money at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. Fair enough.
It's like, I like you, but I'm charging you extra for your past sins.
So I guess another question that we had come through the chat that I'm actually very interested to hear your guys' take on is would love to learn why companies would have sustainability goals while not really being environmentalists. Like, what's the drive to be more sustainable if they're not really that concerned, I guess?
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this first, and I'm curious also to hear from Clark on this after I speak on it, just because I think it's probably going to be a similar answer, actually, in that, like we discussed earlier, in large energy procurement scenarios, almost any company across the United States can purchase renewable energy for cheaper than they can purchase their energy as it's delivered to them as a default. So that very fact makes it very nice and politically correct in a form, and also just convenient for leadership of these really large corporations to be like, here's a goal of 50 or 100% renewable by a certain date. If they believe that almost all of that, the majority, if not all, can be procured at a cheaper rate and they're saving money, then it's a no-brainer. They're hitting their, quote, social mission, and they're supporting the industry. So that's been, I mean, if you look at the corporate procurement gigawatts over the last 5 years alone, I mean, it is so massive, and it's just going up and up because solar is getting cheaper still, not as much as it has in, from 5 years ago, but it's still going down. And so it's just a matter of cost. And I think that applies to really any sustainable solution anyone provides, whether it's wind or solar or agricultural inputs. If you're saving people money, why are they not going to do it unless they're like really diehard oil and gas, which is, those people are few and far between these days. So yeah, that's my thought. It's just a cost thing. And there are people at those companies that are environmentalists, sure, the people who are actually in the sustainability roles, but the leaders are it's unlikely that they are, on the same level that a lot of us on this panel are.
Yeah, so I can speak to that just directly. There's an agricultural retailer is a shop that sells anywhere from seed to fertilizer to any type of input you would need to put on soil to make your crop grow. So one of the largest agricultural retailers is a customer of ours. They do about 150 million a year in sales, pretty large company. Have about 6 different plants where they make all of their different forms of fertilizer and chemicals that they sell to farmers. They solely went to using renewable by adding solar to all of their different plants, because the average plant would be about $20,000 to $30,000 a month. So it wasn't necessarily they were trying to be sustainable, but it was just to become more profitable. So I think it's really smart to and I've seen this with my company, that you don't just focus on one message, and that message being how you're benefiting the environment, but you also have to be focusing on the message of how that benefit is towards the bottom line as well. And I've seen that especially with a lot of the decision makers that are kind of in the baby boomer age range, where there's not as much concern with people like myself, like millennials, where we're a little bit more concerned about our future, because we're going to be here a little bit longer than they are, right? So yeah, that's what I've seen firsthand.
Yeah, and I think the other side of that is that sustainability is about reducing waste. Waste is pretty much just like lighting money on fire if you're a company.
Sure. And we actually had one really interesting question. I think that's a good one to wrap up on, since it is 7 now. But would love to hear your guys' take on how will the oil price crash affect the renewable energy industry?
Typing out an answer there. I think it will. I don't think you'll see a direct impact, because renewable energy is almost exclusively focused on creating electricity, and we don't compete directly with oil for much electricity production really anywhere in the West. A little bit in the Northeast. Natural gas, has already been a rock bottom price, and so folks that already want to build natural gas plants have already had good economic reasons to do so. The biggest thing that it hurts is our ability to get people out of cars, out of internal combustion cars, and into electric vehicles. And I think you're going to see, I've seen gas prices that I haven't seen in my entire lifetime here in Denver, and that doesn't encourage me to go buy an EV, because the operating costs have come down a bunch. And really, the secret to get more renewables and the secret to solving much of our carbon problem in the United States and around the world is electrifying transportation. So I think it has a potential to delay that in a big way. That will cost us both future deployments of solar, because you won't have that demand there, but also, honestly, it's been nice to breathe the air in Denver the last couple of weeks for all the wrong reasons, but it's been nice. And we're going to get ourselves, potentially, because price of gas are so low, going to keep that nasty air around longer than maybe it would have had the price of gas stayed above $3 a gallon.
I think, and I'm not an economist, so don't quote me on this, but I don't think gas prices will remain this low forever. The people whose business it is to make money out of the industry are definitely going to make adjustments. And it could be that future investments, it could be more expensive than ever, because the production, like the ability to produce it, is diminished because of bankruptcies and operations not being able to operate anymore because they lost so much money. So, I think in the near term, I would expect gas to be insanely cheap, but I can't imagine that's going to persist for a long time because the people whose business is to make money would like to continue to make money. And so I don't know if it may be 6 months, like who knows? Like, I don't know if anybody can put a time frame on anything right now because it's pretty uncharted territory. But I don't know if it's going to have that lasting effect. I do think one thing, and again, it gets back to what was making me feel a little bit hopeful, like people seeing the volatility of a basic commodity like energy, like sure, it's cheerful because gas is cheap, but guess what? Nobody can drive anywhere, but it's still cheap, right? So, but people know that there's something really volatile about that. Again, it's that fundamental thing, like looking around at the capability to meet your basic needs and seeing something so wildly fluctuate like that. Like, I just wonder ultimately, and this isn't a business statement, but in the psyche of people and how they respond and what choices they make in the future, whether that's ultimately going to make solar and renewable energy, wind, biomass, like, whatever the source is, more interesting because it doesn't have that sort of, it's almost like a monocrop problem. It's like you're having a blight on a monocrop with the oil and gas industry. And it feels, to me, it's really uncomfortable. It feels really vulnerable. It's really visceral right now. And I just wonder how that's really going to settle with people as we sort of work our way out of this. So that's my thoughts when that question was asked.
That's a really interesting perspective. Thank you. Any last thoughts from any of the panelists before we kind of wrap up, or any last thoughts for the future of renewable energy?
I just want to echo what Jason said. Right now is a great time to go start a side hustle, something you're passionate about, something that you can throw $500 to $1,000 at. And if it doesn't turn into anything, you can at least try to do something to change the earth with this. So that's the number one thing I would say. We've seen so many people lose income from the gig economy because they're just based off of, just these large corporations providing this income. And right now is an opportune time if you're passionate about renewal, sustain, clean technology, what have you. There's people and there's corporations that would love to have you advise them and consult them or make a product for them that they can bring into their home or to their business. So that is my closing thought.
Thank you so much, Clark. And just one last thing I was thinking about. If you do feel comfortable as a panelist sharing like either your LinkedIn or your email with somebody so they can connect with you, feel free to toss that into the chat. If not, everyone can check them out on the GA site. But just wanted to say a huge thank you to all the panelists for being here tonight. You guys were really great and brought a lot of wonderful insight. You can tell by the plethora of good questions that we had. So I appreciate you guys being here and taking your time on Earth Day. And I'm glad that we got to talk about the future of the Earth here tonight. So thank you everybody from the audience for being here. And I hope you guys learned a lot. I'm gonna stop our recording.